brought down in lawful fire, or a policeman marked for death. He was not an ordinary victim. Victor Lubakaya Nganga was a Recce squad officer, one of the elites trained to confront terror, to run toward gunfire when others ran away. But on a dark evening in Bungoma sometime in 2020, it was he who ended up in the sights. Police said he was a dangerous robber killed in a shootout. His family says he was an innocent man executed by fellow officers under the leadership of then Bungoma Head of Criminal Investigations, Joseph Nzioka. The emergence of a viral video of the incident raised disturbing questions. Then ballistic evidence deepened those questions. And at the end of a controversial inquest, justice itself remained divided. So, was Victor Lubakaya a rogue officer brought down in lawful fire, or a policeman marked for death under a false story? Tonight, we are following a killing where the bullets were many, but the truth may be singular. I'm Brian Obuya, and this is not just another murder story on a TV near you. This is Murder Tapes, where the truth is buried in the evidence. 38 shots, and so it begins. Shabak, take it over. There are men trained not merely to confront violence, but to move toward it when others are running away. Men taught to read threat in silence, to breach doors under darkness, to make decisions measured in fractions of seconds, in situations where hesitation can mean death. In the mythology of elite policing, such men inhabit an almost mythic borderland between soldier and lawman. They are sent where ordinary policing ends. And for years, Victor Lubakaya was said to belong to that brotherhood.
Who joined the GSU in the year 1917 after having been in NYS in the year 2016. Kijana huyu alikulia hapa na wenzake ambao wa ukoo wangu. Na kama kawaida vijana wengi hutamani sana kazi ya security. Na mimi kupitia kwa mbinu zangu, Mwenyezi Mungu na bidii za mtoto, alijiunga na kikosi hicho na kuacha wenzake nyuma hapa.
Imagine the paradox then, that a man shaped by the doctrine of tactical restraint and lethal force would one day himself become the target of that force. That is not merely irony, it is tragedy in its purest investigative form. As Murder Tapes crew set out to cover this tragedy then, we realized in hindsight that this is not just an episode of a police shooting. It is the story of how a decorated identity can be inverted into suspicion. An episode on how evidence, at times, fractures into competing truths, and how a death in a darkened street can raise questions that are larger than the man who died there. Before the bullets, before the inquest, before the oversight files and the contested ballistics, there was a young officer stepping into a world that taught him how states confront danger, and perhaps, unknowingly, how they sometimes manufacture it. The temptation in telling stories of disputed killings is to begin at the moment of death. And we are running away from that temptation because murder or whatever name history eventually gives a violent death, begins long before the fatal shot. It begins in some formation of sorts. Victor's father remembers the discipline of a son he raised, a boy who responded to structure.
2020, wakati tulikuwa na mambo ya corona, my son got married. Akawa msichana from Meru University, alikuwa amefanya law, na akasema mlete nyumbani ili sisi wazazi tumjue. Mwezi huo wa 3, 2020.
There is poignancy in hearing fathers defend sons after death.
If there was a robbery the previous day in Bungoma town, how was Dan able to take that? What training does he have to analyze and establish that my son participated? In fact, in other matters, they mentioned that he was armed with a pistol, which was a toy.
But sometimes such testimony does more than grieve. It contests narrative. Because from the beginning, the state's posthumous portrait of Victor as violent suspect collided with the family's and witnesses' portrait of him as officer and reveler. And this entire documentary, in a sense, lives in that collision. To understand why police would later approach Victor as a threat, one has to examine the crimes that drew his name into the orbit of lethal suspicion. We will look into that in a short while. But just as an overview, investigators linked him to violent robbery, to a kidnapping, to a compound incident where an explosive device was reportedly used to blow up a vehicle. These accusations cannot be ordinary. They may appear to justify the force with which he was taken out. But how robust was the intelligence they relied on? How corroborated was that intelligence? How much rested on inference rather than evidence? Or was there intelligence at all? Or it was just an afterthought? That question matters because bad intelligence has often been the invisible prelude to irreversible force. Let's go to the day that Victor was shot. It began as fatal things sometimes do. Began in a gesture too ordinary. So much so that it could not signal alarm. Victor's phone rang. It was a friend asking him to come to town. There is almost nothing dramatic in that by itself. Men call friends for drinks every day. Men have their plans improvised, and their nights unfold without consequence. And I thought this was only known to me until last week when Valentine Atieno said the same thing about her brother Fidel, who died under controversial circumstances. When Fidel went missing and he was away for so many hours, it didn't ring a bell to the family. And her sister had this to say.
I didn't take it that serious because the boys, they work, come home late.
In the same breath, for Victor Lubakaya, there was nothing strange about being called out for drinks or for any other plans. The hour carried the strange mood of the pandemic curfew years. Streets were empty. Businesses were dimming early. Movement was quieter than cities normally allow. There is a nervousness in the air familiar to those months, a sense that ordinary life is happening under restraint. It couldn't stop them anyway. And somewhere inside that subdued night, Victor met Dan.
Lakini bibi yake alikuwa na roho tatanishi kidogo, akisema hawezi kuenda, mwache, lazima waandamane. Kwa hivyo huyo alipoendelea kupika simu akirudia kwamba nataka kumpeleka kwenye sehemu ya burudani, baadaye kijana wangu alikubali kama rafiki yake na yule mwenyeji. lakini bibi akasitiza kwamba lazima waende pamoja.
Wakati alipigiwa simu, msichana niambia wanaenda kununua vitu town, yani kufanya tu shopping yao kidogo kidogo na kutengeneza makucha.
Pikipiki iliyokuja hapa kwangu nyumbani, nyumba ya kijana yangu ikiwa hapa, ilikuwa ya rafiki ya Dani. Na kumchukua kijana yangu marehemu Victor na bibi yake. Lakini wakiwa wanaenda, simu ziliendelea kupigwa kwamba anachelewa. Mpaka bibi akaanza kumuuliza mbona simu hizi za haraka haraka. Walienda mpaka town, wakafika sehemu ya Chebukuve. Bibi akiwa na nia kutaka kutengeneza makucha yake. Lakini walipoketi kabla kazi ianze, bado simu ikaendelea kulia. Mpaka wakao kufanya hiyo kazi. Wakaenda sehemu nyingine. Kumbuka wakati huo kwa sababu ya corona sehemu zote za burudani zilikuwa zimefungwa. Lakini ilikuwa imetengwa rasmi siku hiyo.
There was laughter and happiness by some accounts. There was alcohol. There was the slow comfort of familiar company. Nothing, at least outwardly, announced danger. But then two other men appeared, or perhaps they had already been there. That itself is part of the ambiguity in this entire story if you follow keenly. These men were introduced, according to later accounts, as police officers. They were not arresting officers, but companions who were there socially that evening to also have drinks with a friend. And here is where the night begins changing texture.
Wakaenda na kupata Bwana Dani Lusanya amekaa na watu wawili waliojitambulisha kwa majina ya utani, si majina rasmi. Mmoja akisema anaitwa Otile Brown, askari kutoka Kisumu. Mwingine akasema yeye anaitwa Keya, askari kutoka Busia. Jina yangu pia akatambulisha kwamba yeye anaitwa Nganga Victor, anafanya kazi na GSU kule Mombasa. Basi wakaanza vinywaji. Wale wageni wananunua, yeye pia ananunua. Bunde si punde, hawa marafiki zake wakaanza kusisitiza kwamba bibi yake amwache aende nyumbani yeye apaki. Lakini bibi alikataa katakata kwamba vile walivyokuja wote lazima warudi wote. Basi kuelekea masaa ya saa 1, saa 12:30 ikawa hiyo bai ifungwe. Ile Dani aliyeita kijana yangu akatoka mapema mbele. Kijana yangu alipoamuka kumfuata, hao wawili walimfuata, mmoja akatoa pistol akamchapa. Kijana yangu alipoona pistol akapika magoti chini akapepa mikono juu. Mwingine yeye akamchapa pia nyuma. Na askari wengine waliingia hapo kutokea pepe mbalimbali. Bibi yake alipolalamika ni kwa nini mnachapa bwanangu, walisema tumuui, hii ni plastic tu. Na baadaye aliuawa. Dani alipotea. Hakupatikana ambaye alikuwa amemuita. Yule msichana bibi yake akakuja akanipata hapa kwa boma kwa mtu huo. Nilikuwa nimefunga hapo ng'ombe. Nikijaribu kutibu ng'ombe. Alikuwa na mgonjwa kidogo. Mchungaji wangu.
Alafu kidogo tulikuwa hapa nyumbani, nilikuwa hapo kwa veranda tu. Alafu kidogo naona msichana anakuja mbia anapumua. Kamuuliza nini? Anasema anaanza kusema akaa chini, anasema Victor. Lakini asemi kitu. Sasa nikamlazimisha nini wewe? Ati Victor. Na anakaa chini.
Akaniambia Victor ameuawa. Nikamuuliza kwa nini? Kumekuwa na watu wengine wakasema wao ni maaskari. Tukakaa vizuri. Tukashiriki kwenye vinywaji na baadaye umemuua na Dani ametoroka simuoni. Baada ya muda si mrefu, social media ilikuwa imejaa habari kwamba Victor Lubakaya ameuawa, jambazi Zugu, na Dani ndiye tena anapost.
Tukajaribu kupiga simu inaingia na hawachukui. Kidogo tunaanza kusikia watu wanapiga masimu wanatuambia.
Sisi tulipata mshangao. Sasa ikawa mimi nianze kutuliza familia yangu. Na kuambia kwamba si yeye. Kwa sababu nilikuwa naona hali si nzuri.
Some murders begin with pursuit. Others begin with invitation. Victor Lubakaya Nganga may have answered one such invitation. An invitation to death. Let us now revisit that part I mentioned. Why police treated Victor as a threat. Now, After Victor Lubakaya had been shot dead in a barrage of extraordinary violence, the gunfire gave way to something more familiar in cases of disputed police killings. The official story. As has often happened after lethal force is used, police turned quickly to the media, presenting the death not as a killing requiring scrutiny, but as the elimination of a dreaded criminal, an armed and dangerous man, they said, had terrorized Bungoma through a string of robberies over recent months.
Na alikuwa na bunduki na alijaribu kupigia askari risasi, lakini tukamwangusha.
It was a narrative delivered with the certainty of fact before the evidence had been fully tested and before competing accounts could take hold. And its function, at least in part, appeared unmistakable. It was to shape public perception before questions could harden. It was to transform an execution of a man into an operation and to control the story around Victor's death before others could challenge it. And police have always been very clever in that line. The then DCIO Bungoma, Mr. Joseph Nzioka, became the most central person in the story. He told all police officers who were present to present that same story. It was the official narrative from all the 7 statements from the police officers who went for that killing. And what was the story? That the previous day, as night had already fallen over Namachanja estate, terror entered the Ketia home. The country was in the fast and easy days of COVID curfew. The streets were empty early. Doors were shut before darkness settled. Neighborhoods learning the strange silence of a lockdown. And inside one family compound in Bungoma, that loneliness was broken by intrusion. Police will later say a lone attacker slipped into the home of businessman Niraj Ketia and his wife under the cover of evening. Police said there was money taken. Some reports put it at 30,000. But it was not the theft that people would remember. It was what came next. According to the robbery account later relied upon by police, the intruder who was confronted while escaping produced what appeared to be a pistol, a gun, or something meant to look like one. Then an explosive was hurled. They said it was a bomb, and that this vehicle was twisted under the concoction of that bomb, throwing the neighborhood into panic. And the specter of something even more terrifying than robbery entered the story. Police were now dealing with what they believed was organized violence involving grenades in militant-style attack. According to police, that man, that intruder, that kidnapper was Victor Lubakaya, the man who, by the following evening, would lie dead under a hail of police gunfire.
Alikuwa na grenades na akiondoka akatupia gari moja pale na akaenda. Wananchi wale waliibiwa ama wale waliadhiriwa tuliweza kumtambua na tukashirikiana wao tukafuatilia kutoka jana mpaka wa leo. Tumefaulu kupata huyo mwizi na alikuwa na bunduki na alijaribu kupigia askari risasi, lakini tukamwangusha.
And yet, this is where the story begins to fray. Because for all the certainty later attached to Victor as the alleged robber, the factual bridge connecting him to that crime was never fully laid in evidence. No forensic exhibit publicly tied him to the Ketia compound. No fingerprints, no DNA, no explosive residue. There was no recovered stolen property traced to him. There was no identification parade disclosed. There was no phone data analysis placing him inside the robbery scene. There was no informer intelligence that was ever produced in detail. There was no evidence tendered showing how investigators moved from a violent home invasion to fixing on Victor Lubakaya as their suspect. Police will later say the victims had positively identified Victor from photographs, but the claim itself opens a chain of troubling absences. What photographs were these? Who presented them? Under what safeguards were they shown? And crucially, did this alleged identification happen before Victor was killed or only after his death had already been folded into the robbery narrative? Those questions linger unanswered, and in a case involving fatal police force, unanswered questions carry their own evidentiary weight. Because the robbery allegation did not simply provide background to the shooting. It furnished the justification for it, supplying a script through which a dead officer could be recast as a violent criminal. The killing reframed as a lawful operation, and every bullet made to appear not as a possible execution, but as a legitimate police response.
Yeye ameita kijana yangu aende na yeye ameuawa. Nikienda kwao akawaga hakupatikani. Bibi yake akasema hajaonekana. Tulienda kumtafuta. Alionekana baada ya wiki moja hivi katika kijiji hiki. Alipotea kabisa. Na anaposti kwamba jambazi huko ameuawa. Kwa jina mpaka anataja jina. Lakini alipotea akaonekana katika kijiji hiki after 1 week ndiye alianza kuonekana.
If the robbery accusation against Victor was mistaken, then the entire justification for his killing begins to unravel, especially when police reliance of an unnamed informer was never identified, tested or produced raises more questions than answers. Whether that informer was real, whether someone within Victor's own circle may have unwittingly or unknowingly acted as conduit, or whether suspicion itself was constructed through opaque intelligence, that remains unresolved.
Was done in any security avenues to identify my son as attack, who had done a robbery in town, because he's the one who gave the information and his names, and used his Facebook account to download photos and take to the police station. What position does Dan hold in the security matters of this county?
How do you know he did that?
We have some information that he was seen delivering the photos to the policeman before the incident took place. And he is also overwhelmingly mentioned. And indeed, he invited my son. What position does he hold? If there was a robbery the previous day in Bungoma town, how was Dan able to take that? What training does he have to analyze and establish that my son participated? In fact, in other matters, they mentioned that he was armed with a pistol, which was a toy. And in the same place, they say they exchanged. With my ignorance in security matters, can a toy pistol exchange with live guns? Secondly, they took his phone and said he had exchanged calls and messages with other people. Thugs. Why did they disappear with that phone? It was supposed to be produced in court with evidence with the people he communicated with. Was it not? Why did this hide my son's phone? If it has that evidence. It was supposed to be produced. If they said, here you can see he communicated with this one, here he communicated with this dark, here I could be certified that my son was attacked. But they never produced that phone up to date. They never produced the toy pistol in court. They said there was an exchange of fire. Evidence of exchange of fire should be produced. That the others ran away, and they only managed him. Why did Dan only call this one and not the other thugs?
Police called it a justified shootout. But as you can already see, buried beneath that account are troubling questions about an alleged informer and a possible lure, and whether Victor was marked a suspect before he was killed. After the break, ballistics begins to test that story, and in court, A family's fight for justice runs into our fractured criminal justice system. Murder Tapes returns shortly. By the time the Independent Policing Oversight Authority entered this case, the official version had already acquired the hardening quality police narratives often develop when repeated long enough. That there had been a shootout, police officers responded to danger, a suspect died, and a gun was recovered. It was that simple and closed.
Hiyo ni kitu ilipangwa tu, walipanga tu story by the way. Na walifaulu sababu kama walimuua, walifaulu.
But investigations worth the name are rarely satisfied by simplicity. They reopen what certainty has prematurely buried. And that is what makes the IPOA investigations so consequential. Because the probe by IPOA did not merely revisit the death of Victor. It began interrogating the architecture of the story built around it. Witnesses were traced and their statements were taken. The scene evidence was reconsidered and ballistics too. Involved police officers' accounts were compared, and little by little, the tidy coherence of the police version began showing strain and trembled along its own thread. I will begin by looking into what the top DCI officer told the press and the IPOA. That police officer is Mr. Joseph Nzioka, the Bungoma South Sub-County Criminal Investigations Officer and the operational lead in this case. He cast the shooting as the climax of a manhunt already underway, saying he and a combined team of DCI and critical infrastructure police unit officers had spent the day tracking a robbery suspect linked not only to the Namachanja attack on March 30th, but to an earlier alleged kidnapping involving businessman Niraj Ketia, relying, he said, on photographs, phone numbers, and intelligence from an informer to trace the suspect to the Kenya Power area. Nzioka said that from a position near Coolbay's hotel, he claimed his team confronted a group of 3 men outside a wines and spirits joint, where the suspects allegedly defied orders to surrender and opened fire, triggering a shootout in which Victor was fatally shot while 2 others escaped, after which officers recovered his police credentials, a technophone, and what Nzioka described as an imitation pistol, while he himself admitted to discharging 2 rounds from his Jericho pistol, ostensibly to disperse members of the public. Never mind, the technophone that Nzioka talks about was never handed over to the family or to investigators. It either did not exist or held contrary evidence to what police were dealing with. Let me not go into what the other 6 police officers said, because they regurgitated what Mr. Nzioka had said. But at this moment, Murder Tapes looks at the ballistics report as prepared by firearms examiner Alex Chirchir. Chief Inspector Richard Chemweno delivered exhibits to the DCI firearms examiner for forensic analysis. This was consisting of 9 firearms in total. There were 3 AK-47 rifles, 4 Cheska pistols, 1 Jericho pistol, and 1 Browning pistol, along with 10 rounds submitted by Police Constable Stephen Etugu, 38 fired cartridge cases, and 3 fired bullets. 2 of the Cheska pistols were identified as government-issued weapons under the administration police, while the remaining firearms bore the markings of the Kenya police. All the exhibits were confirmed to be capable of firing. Investigations further established that the toy pistol allegedly recovered during a search of Victor Lubakaya's body, and which was taken for ballistic examination and marked as Exhibit G, was confirmed to be a plastic imitation firearm and not capable of firing. Coincidentally, no one saw this toy pistol until it was delivered for ballistics and paraded to the media. Please remember that detail. In fact, a witness called Lillian, who recorded a video of the incident, told the investigation she had 2 to 3 gunshots from the direction of the Kenya Power offices.
Mama, unalipua mtu mama. Nyamaza. Nyamaza.
She rushed and peeped through the shop ventilation and saw a man lying on the ground, facing upwards with his hands spread and empty.
Maskari 7. Mtu mmoja.
She recorded the scene on her phone and later shared the video with IPOA investigators. She further stated that shortly after, a vehicle with registration number KCD 660U arrived at high speed and parked near the body, after which a tall man in a white t-shirt and red Marvin alighted and shot Victor several times before touching the body, ostensibly to confirm he was dead. 2 other men armed with long guns were also firing in the air to disperse people as they collected bullet casings, while a Somali man was seen making phone calls.
Umesimama punge, tumefanya vizuri kufunga watoto jamani. Gari imekuwa imepaka hapo, hiyo Prado, alafu ingine imekuja sahi. Ndio Prado inaenda. Alafu kuna imekuja sahi. Wacha ni zoom KCD 660U. 1 2 maskari 6. Wawili wanakaa horia. Sijui maskari wamevaa civilian tu.
The witness went ahead to say that she also saw a police vehicle arrive, from which a man in a red jacket and black trouser alighted and went where the body was, touching it. And another short man in a blue Marvin and black trousers was also seen shooting at the victim. She said she saw about 6 people in total, with 2 directly shooting the victim and others firing in the air before police eventually arrived, collected the body, and left in a green police Land Cruiser.
AK-47 mbili, pistols, AK-47 3. Watu walikuwa wamemaliza kufunga. Mimi vile nimesikia tu risasi hivi kuja, napata watu wanatoka mbio. Mama inakaa wametumwa kuua. Juu wanaokota cartridges za bullet. Yeah.
That evidence would later be corroborated by what the firearms examiner Alex Chirchir found. The police officers on site were police officer number 217303 Joseph Nzioka, number 222388 Inspector of Police Paul Serem. There was also number 90903 Corporal Kipkurui Serem. Also at the scene was Police Constable number 82398 Felix Mbuvi, number 82881 Police Constable George Mwangi Washira, and also at the scene was number 236352 Administration Police Constable Abdi Jilo, and number 228069 Administration Police Constable Stephen Etugu. At the end of the investigations, the ballistic samples taken to the DCI laboratory showed that at least 38 bullets were fired that evening. Joseph Nzioka, and this is the man I told you was the head of the Sub-County Criminal Investigations Office, had fired 2 bullets. Take note of that. Police officer Paul Serem had fired 8 bullets. Corporal Kipkurui Serem had discharged 3 bullets. Felix Mbuvi, 11 bullets. 3 from his pistol and an extra 8 from George Washira's AK-47 rifle. Police Constable George Mwangi Washira himself had fired 5 rounds. And Administration Police Constable Abdu Jilo had fired 3 bullets as Stephen Etugu discharged 8 rounds. The only question would be what really necessitated such a barrage of violence? So many bullets being fired at one man.
My son had hardly finished a week here from Mombasa for his leave with a newly wed woman. Do you go for a robbery with your wife? And you have done a robbery around that place. Do you go and sit there and drink alcohol? If you are in your senses and you are trained security man and you carry your wife and go sit in the same place you did a robbery with your wife, it is not possible. It doesn't make sense. Even a child who has just stolen a pencil from somebody's bag will want to run away from that bag.
Now, by asking you to remember that Joseph Nzioka, the DCIO, fired 2 bullets, is because despite his own admission, none of the evidence on the ground linked him to any shooting. And this is very typical of senior police officers who are ready to give instructions to junior police officers but have a way of covering their own tracks. If this case would have gone to full trial, there was no way, even in the IPOA report, that the investigators could link the head of the Criminal Investigations Department to the shooting of Victor Lubakaya, because no casing, no bullet, and no any form of evidence linked him to the killing, but the remaining 6 police officers. Despite the fact that he is the one who led the operation and gave the other police officers the instructions on what they were dealing with and how to respond. So, what do you call a death that one institution sees as murder and another treats as lawful force? Whichever interpretation one favors, one fact survives. The IPOA investigations shattered the simplicity of the original police story. After it, no serious telling of Victor Lubakaya's death can rest comfortably on the word shootout alone. That word has been too wounded by evidence. In short, we are saying that evidence shows there was no shootout.
In fact, in the other matters, they mentioned that he was armed with a pistol, which was a toy. And in the same place, they say they exchanged. With my ignorance in security matters, can a toy pistol exchange with live guns? Because they exchanged using a toy pistol. Does it make any sense? That he had a toy pistol and they really exchanged, which means he was shooting, they were shooting. A toy pistol, which they was in their position. Secondly, they took his phone and said he had exchanged calls and messages with other people. Thugs. Why did they disappear with that phone? It was supposed to be produced in court with evidence with the people he communicated with. Was it not? Why did this hide my son's phone? If it has that evidence. It was supposed to be produced. If they said, here you can see he communicated with this one, here he communicated with this dark, here I could be certified that my son was a dark. But they never produced that phone up to date. They never produced the toy pistol in court. They said there was an exchange of fire. Evidence of exchange of fire should be produced. That the others ran away and they only managed him. Why did Dan only call this one and not the other that to sit with them?
In the end, despite overwhelming evidence and a recommendation from IPOA to charge the officers with murder, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions appears to have chosen the usual easier route of closing the case through an inquest, effectively allowing the matter to end without criminal prosecution or any form of justice.
By profession, I'm a teacher. I have some ignorance when it comes to law. But that was also some kind of cunning way of handling this case. Yeah, the prosecution, I think, didn't do their work well. Yeah. Because in a case where people agree that we killed, how does it become an inquest? And people are saying we did it under the command of so and so, mentioning the names. How does it become an inquest? And the killers are known by names and titles.
And at the inquest, despite glaring contradictions on record, Senior Principal Magistrate Patrick Olengo is seen to have leaned heavily on the mistaken identity narrative, entertaining that police officers genuinely shot the wrong man through mistaken identity, downplaying key evidential concerns that were raised during the proceedings. What remains undisputed is that there was a shooting and that the officers themselves admitted to discharging their firearms. It is also not in dispute that Victor Lubakaya Nganga was not found with a functional weapon. This directly undermines the central justification advanced by the police that they were facing armed and dangerous criminals in an active shootout. In short, again, there was no shootout. All the gun casings and bullets that were collected from the scene of crime and submitted for ballistic examination, they all matched police guns, meaning only police officers were firing that evening. Even more troubling is the volume of force used. Ballistic evidence established that over 30 bullets were fired during that incident. This raises a critical and unanswered question. If officers genuinely believed they were under threat, why was such excessive and sustained fire necessary, particularly in a public setting? Proportionality, which is a core requirement in the use of lethal force, is not convincingly demonstrated on the record. Yet, Senior Principal Magistrate Patrick Olengo ignored that fact. A key eyewitness account further complicates the court's acceptance of the police version. The witness told the court that she saw an officer approach the already fallen Victor lying on the ground with his hands spread open and shot him at close range. This account points away from a chaotic exchange of gunfire and toward a far more troubling scenario that was not fully interrogated in the final analysis.
Aipo walisema kulikuwa na interest hapa Bungoma. Wale waliomuua wana wengine wanafanya hapa kotini. Sasa hatungefanyia hapo kesi. Jikisawa ilipelekwa psikia for justice to prevail. Lakini hata huko tulipoanza kesi iliendelea vizuri. Jambo la kushangaza ni kwamba now towards the judgment of the case, things again turned around.
Kila askari mwenye alikuwa anaitwa sijui alikuwa maaskari karibu 7. Mwenye alikuwa anaulizwa alikuwa anasema tu alipata order kutoka kwa DCI. Na huyo DCI imagine hakutestify na magistrate akasema ati hawakuwa na makosa.
Just from my ignorance, I'm not a lawyer. I wondered how somebody who was mentioned so many times by all the witnesses, how can a judgment be established without him appearing in court?
Sasa sisi tulikuwa interested tusikie DCI alioda huyu mtoto apigwe risasi kwa nini, but sasa hakutestify na kesi karuliwa. Mnyonge hana haki. Sasa tuliona tu pengine hao walikuwa na pesa na huyu alipelekewa bahasha. Sasa akasema ati hawa hawakuwa na makosa, ati walifikiria walikuwa wanajitetea na kadhalika, but sasa yani walikuwa wanajaribu kumingle tu hivi, but tukasema ni sawa.
Instead of resolving these contradictions, the ruling appears to have absorbed them into the doctrine of mistaken identity and operational risk. But mistaken identity on its own does not address why verification failed before lethal force was escalated, nor does it reconcile the confirmed absence of a functional weapon with the claim of an armed confrontation. The court also appeared to accept prior intelligence about kidnappings and robberies as sufficient justification for the officers' belief that they were confronting dangerous suspects.
When I went to the chambers of the magistrate to complain about the late judgment, he told me, I'm sorry. I say that in the fear of God, that I've already made this judgment, but I was misled. That's what he told me. And I cannot change. Who misled him? Because as a judge, you make an independent investigation and an independent decision. You should not be influenced by any external powers. But he told me, I've already made a judgment, but at some level I was misled. So now I asked him, how are you misled? He said, niliambiwa hii kesi ilifanywa Bungoma, ikashindwa ndio makaleta huku. Was he supposed to get information from external orders or from his own experience as a judge? That one also brought me some challenge. Yeah. So I want to say here that according to me, judgment that was delivered by the magistrate in 42 Busia was not balanced. There were some interested parties which was negative to us as a family. And because of that, we are appealing that we want fair justice. So we are ready to open other doors of the law of Kenya to ensure that we get justice for our late son.
Murder Tapes submits that belief, however honestly held, cannot replace evidential certainty where the use of deadly force is concerned, nor can it automatically validate the scale of force deployed when the outcome is largely one-sided discharge of firearms. The coverage of that ruling was highly contested by the magistrate. Despite having covered other proceedings, journalists had a tough time attempting to cover the final ruling as read by Senior Principal Magistrate Patrick Olengo.
When this case was starting, it was a case of interest. In fact, during the first mention, all pressmen, news reporters were full in court, in attendance, and they were allowed. So as days moved on, they would come one or two and cover. But when it came to the day of judgment, this judge completely refused and chased the person outside the courtroom, that he does not take pictures and he doesn't want to be that case to be listened to. So as a Kenyan, I wondered, whose interest was he serving? Because as a government civil servant, why should you reject press from listening to your judgment?
Hataki kuchukuliwa nini na kamera, wakawacha na akafanya venye alifanya, ikaisha hivyo.
Alikataa watu wa media?
Alikataa. Tulienda na watu wa media, alikataa. Alikataa, hataki kuchukuliwa.
Ultimately, the ruling on the killing of Victor Lubakaya reflects a pattern where evidential inconsistencies are not fully resolved, but rather absorbed into a broader narrative that protects institutional action. The result is an inquest outcome that closes the file without clearly addressing the most critical question: whether the killing was justified in law on the facts as actually established, rather than on the fears or assumptions held in the moment and the inconsistencies that the court chose to admit. And just like many other stories that we always end with a question, even in the case of Victor Lubakaya, Murder Tapes concludes with a question: will the family of Victor Lubakaya ever find any form of reparation?
Hata sijui nitasema nini, kwa sababu katika hiyo mshtuko ilifanya nikapata complications mingi sana.
Right now, as you see me, I now weigh 72 kilograms. That's my body weight. If you went to my account, that's Facebook account, my weight was 82 kilograms. When people wonder, what do you mean? See, know why, what happened to me? It affected me seriously. Yeah. Life has never been the same again. Although I've had the children.
Hiyo kesi ilikuwa very straightforward. Yani ilikuwa na evidence, ilikuwa na everything.
Okay, that was my firstborn. But he was not just a son. He was a friend.
Angalau hata justice ipatikane tu, yani au maskari at least wasifanyie mtu mwingine yenye watufanyia. Ngumu. Sababu ya wakiadhibiwa hawatafanyia mwingine kwa sababu sitamani mtu mwingine asikie yenye tulisikia.
For Victor Lubakaya's family, the questions have never truly ended. What role did Dan Lusanya play in summoning him to that meeting? Why did so many police officers fire? And why did a fellow policeman die branded as a criminal? The courts may have spoken, but some verdicts, many verdicts actually, do not close wounds, they deepen them. And for me, perhaps, the most haunting truth in this story is the realization that some deaths end lives, others expose the systems meant to explain them. Victor Lubakaya's did both. And in the space between explanation and uncertainty, he remains. I'm Brian Obuya.